park rides that killed people, and some of them are still open. Starting off the list is the Orlando Free Fall ride, where just a couple years ago, a 14-year-old fell to his death after not being properly secured. So the ride goes up 430 feet and then drops you to a stop. Now, the ride has a weight limit of 285 pounds, but the operator at the time let the 14-year-old, 383-pound kid get on the ride. And then he didn't properly secure his safety harness, as you can see, causing him to fall out of the ride and unfortunately pass away. Next up is the Batman ride at Six Flags in Georgia, which has killed 2 people at this point. One was a groundskeeper that went back there when he wasn't supposed to be, and as the ride came around, somebody's leg kicked him in the actual head and broke the person's leg, but also killed him. The other person was a kid who had been riding the ride and lost his hat on the ride. Then he went over and jumped these fences that said, "Extreme danger, do not jump." And as you can see, that ride gets pretty low to the ground. Unfortunately for him, he was hit by the ride and decapitated. The big question, did he get his hat, will remain unanswered. The next 2 will be these types of rides, which we've all kind of ridden. You go down this little inner tube. Well, in Dream World, Australia, there's a ride called the Thunder River Rapids. And in 2016, while a group of people were riding it, one of the water pumps actually failed. And in less than 15 seconds, it allowed the water levels to drop just enough for this ride to get stuck on the conveyor belts, and the other one hit into it, it flipped over, and the 4 people that were actually riding the ride were stuck in here and ended up ultimately drowning. The other ride, called Raging River, which is located in Adventureland in Iowa, actually flipped over. But on this ride, unfortunately, they had seatbelt restraints, and 2 of the parents that were on the ride were flown from the ride, but the 2 children, an 11-year-old and a 16-year-old, actually were stuck in their safety belt. Now, this is actual footage somebody took of the ride when people are trying to help them get out, and the kids were actually stuck in there for 7 to 10 minutes. Witnesses say one ended up dying, the 11-year-old. The other one was put in a medically induced coma when he arrived at the hospital, and fortunately he ended up surviving the incident and was released from the hospital about 30 days later. Next up is the Verrückt in Schlitterbahn, Kansas, opening in 2014 and quickly closing in 2016 after the decapitation of a lawmaker's son. When it opened, it was the tallest water slide in the world at 168 feet. Well, unfortunately, the design had this netting going around for good reason, because during testing, this was actual footage of it launching off. So they had to make sure they kept it inside the restraint. Even putting people inside these buckles. Unfortunately, he was flown from the buckle and actually hit his head on the netting, causing him to be decapitated. Next up, we have the Human Trebuchet, which was in Middlemore Water Park in England. This one just looks like a bad idea. Basically what happens is they set you in this little seat here, they pull it all the way back, and they launch you 180 feet at 40 miles per hour, and you land in a net. Well, one person didn't land in a net, and you can only guess what happened to him. Next up, we have the Mind Scrambler in Playland, New York. Now, 2 people in 3 years died on this ride. You can't really see it from that other image, but basically this is what the ride looks like. You've probably ridden these even at your local fair. Yeah, the middle oscillates, and then these things also oscillate at the same exact time, causing you to get some G-forces. Well, in 2004, a little girl was riding the ride, and she undid her lap restraint, causing her to fly out of the ride and die. And then at another time in 2007, a 27-year-old was loading people on the ride. He was a worker there, and the other worker actually started the ride, causing him to get smacked by the ride and die. Next up, we have a Six Flags ride called the Superman Ride of Steel, which was renamed just the Ride of Steel. And this ride has actually killed 3 people. You see, in 2004, a man with cerebral palsy was allowed to ride the ride, and he was actually thrown from the ride, ultimately dying. Then in 2011, an Army vet that had lost both of his legs in Iraq was also allowed to ride the ride, and he was thrown from the ride as well, ultimately dying. And in 1999, another guy was thrown out of the ride, but he only broke his hips. I say only because, as the alternative is, you could have died. So I guess 3 people haven't really died on this ride. 2 have died and 1 was injured. Next, we have the Mindbender in Galaxyland, Canada. See, this opened in 1985 as the tallest indoor roller coaster, standing a staggering 150 feet. But a mere 6 months later, while full of riders, when it approached the 3rd loop, the wheel assembly started to come off. This caused the carts to sway back and forth, and actually the lap bars then released. 4 of the passengers were actually thrown from the ride, and 3 of those 4 died. 1 was critically injured. The cart then started going backwards and flew into a concrete pillar, injuring people that were around the pillar. Despite its crazy start, you can still ride it today, and it's even won several safety awards over the years.